Does anyone have a first question for Robert, maybe? Just raise your hand. Yeah, just there. Can you give her a microphone?
Just shout and I'll repeat it.
I have questions about the stories that you told us about your expeditions to Antarctica. So the first one, your first expedition, you said that the beginning stage was 9.5 months together with this team of 5 people. And what did the 5 of you do during those 9 months? And during your last expedition, where you had to restart twice, how did you actually get back home? And how did you get back to the starting place when you picked up again with your replaced hip?
Yeah, well, the 9.5 months in the hut, obviously, it's very hard to train to walk to the pole unless you're in Antarctica. And that's why so many expeditions now that go down to Antarctica have problems, because they're not spending enough time there before they go, if they're going to make a big journey on foot or whatever. So in those 9.5 months, it's quite extraordinary that time really went fast, because you've got to survive. So as it got darker and darker and more horrible, every 5 days, one person would be in charge of everything. And of course, when my day came, they weren't very happy, because my cooking is weak to very weak. But you would be in charge of everything: food, melting water, doing everything, keeping the stove going, everything. So once every 5 days, you would be in charge for 24 hours. And the rest of the time, you could just get on with your life. And people would do a lot of reading. Obviously, there were no sort of Netflix or laptops. A lot of reading and going out and testing things for the South Pole, because we knew that if something broke, we weren't coming home. So there was a lot of testing, a lot of reading, and a lot of people regretting me and my cooking. So it was very interesting how quickly it went, actually. Amazing thing. And then I think your second question was about what it was like to come back after my hip fell out. Yeah, well, we were 97 miles from the pole when it fell out. If you get rescued, that's like $180,000 US. And of course, no one will ever insure me. So luckily, a friend of mine, because I've been there for a long time in Antarctica, a friend of mine, completely against the rules, was sort of flying somebody else, and he just dropped in and said, no one should know this. Went onto the plane and then got to the South Pole with the hip still hanging out. And then 2 doctors happened to be there, an American doctor, because there's an American base at the South Pole, and a New Zealand doctor, and they didn't have any damn pills. So I said, just get on with it. And it was like one of those old films from the old, so they said, chew on this. Just so I wouldn't break something. And they put the damn thing back in, which was a bit grim. And then I went by aeroplane back to the base camp and then out to the real world. So I hope that answered the question. Thank you.
Robert, you were a witness there of climate change, of course, back on the South Pole. Maybe Samuel can just explain us a bit of the big topics that are today about climate change. You also worked a lot in the Antarctic. What are our big problems right now?
Sorry, I can't handle this. So the big questions is really, it remains very complicated to go. It remains very challenging. We have better airplanes, we have better ships, but it remains very complicated to go. And so, yeah, and dangerous. And most people go there in summer. And so we have great records now, we have good observations, but they're only limited to 2-3 months in a year. So I think that's the main challenge at the moment, is trying to generate data, observations, but outside of the summer windows, the austral summer window. And so now there are more sensors, as you were mentioning, different floats that are independent. And so, yeah, I think that's the thing. And many of the mechanisms that really matter, especially that with this ocean and ice interaction, the cryosphere and ocean interaction happen in winter. And so we have no clue at how this happens. And we cannot observe them with satellites because it's dark. So it's a matter of seasonality. So there are a lot of efforts now in Antarctica in terms of science, but still very much focused on the austral summer.
Where is your base there?
So I'm an oceanographer, so I mostly work on icebreakers and ships. So.
On ships, right, okay.
Robert, you said that the biggest threat to our planet is to believe that someone else will save it. What did you mean?
Well, what I mean is that there are so many people, as I say, present company accepted, who know what we face. They know that they should change, but they aren't. And people like our esteemed scientists here have bust themselves to give us the science, amazingly, to tell us what the situation is. Incredible. But who's bloody listening? So I think that's what I mean, is that we've got science, you put it onto the table, you've told us. People aren't listening, therefore it's down to us, not expecting somebody else to sort this out. But science has done its bit, now it's our turn. And that's what I mean about it's our responsibility. But as you both know more than I know, is the clock is ticking. And we've maybe got, another 10 years, double that to 20 years before it's gone past a certain point where we're not going to come back. And that's a bit depressing. And I just think that we've got to listen to science, but we can't think that somebody else, listen, then it goes out through that ear, other side of your head. I think that it is our responsibility to react to that. And the thing is that no one in this room is starving. We've all got a nice home to go to. So therefore we have a responsibility to do that. That's what I was trying to say. It probably didn't make much sense, but that's what I was trying to say.
Danièle, maybe a question for you. COP29 is starting in 3 weeks now. What would you say to the heads of state who are not really united fighting climate change? Swiss Polar Institute is trying to find scientists together and make this expedition together. What would you say to the head of the countries?
What we already say. I think what the point Robert was making is really important. I mean, we are like in a decoupled system. There is science being produced, there are people acting, there is environmentalists and organizations that are pushing, and we have, of course, industry and all sorts of actors with different interests. And we are not speaking a common language, and it's very easy to actually push the misunderstanding, the blame, and the inaction on each other. That's exactly your point. And I think this is exactly what we're witnessing in the very complex processes that are at play when we talk of, for example, COP processes, where there are so many actors with so many interests, with so many different states of development and needs. We are in such a comfortable situation here, and yet we cannot agree in Switzerland about not to cut science, for example, because we think we have a public debt problem. So how can we talk with credibility with countries whose coastlines are going to be underwater? We were thinking before about the biggest challenges in terms of environment for Antarctica alone. Antarctica alone with, I mean, you will correct this because it's a bit of a simplification, holds the potential for 60 meters of sea level rise. I mean, 60 meters, you can't build a wall for 60 meters anymore, and you cannot insure anything for 60 meters anymore. So it's an economic collapse that we are talking about, and that's probably also why it's so hard to face, because it's so big, and breaking it down in face of this very difficult discussion, these divergent interests, these complicated timelines that we are facing makes everything so big and so complex that it's almost overwhelming.
I think that I went to COP28 in the UAE, and the guy who was running it was actually not a bad chap, But his words actually were true, unfortunately. At the end, he said, look, if we just cut fossil fuels entirely, the world goes to the Stone Age. But that's not what he should have said, personally. He should have said, look, we've got to have the energy transition. And of course, the energy transition isn't perfect. It's not perfect. There aren't enough minerals to supply every single car on the planet if we all go to electric cars. There just simply aren't enough precious minerals to do that job for batteries. So we've got to think about how the hell you make batteries which don't require all of those minerals and people digging holes in Chile and copper mines and all that dreadful stuff. And I think that, I hope that the COP29 is just a bit more practical and just saying, you know, here's 5 things that we're going to get done. They just have this, as you say, it's all so complicated. And I go to those things, and I'm not going this time, and I just come away and my whole head sort of blows up because there's just too much. I don't know what to think or what to say. I think if they make it practical and they are inspiring, and especially to young people, I think that's what they should try and do. Keep it simple, keep it tight, keep it easy to explain.
How big do you think is the risk in 2041 that the mining will be used in Antarctica?
Well, no one owns it. And that, in a way, opens the door to people saying, well, if no one owns it, we'll have it. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be a fight, but I don't think we should just let it go. And the problem is with anything in life is that they'll put something in, they'll put one test oil drilling platform somewhere on the Antarctic Peninsula, and they'll say it's all for science or something. But once that's in, it opens up the whole door. And I think that it's very, very difficult. Our team here know about it. But if I came to this room earlier and said, does anybody know what's happening between 2041 and 2048 in Antarctica, very few people in this room would know. So I've basically failed terribly in the last 33 years of trying to get it on the radar. But I'm not going to step back and keep trying. And I think it's possible to do it. But people's greed is what we're up against. And as I said at the beginning, the fact that climate change is not on the agenda in the most powerful country on earth when they're electing a president is a bit worrying. And I do believe in, I think science is key. But I'd like to see the science of solutions somehow being bigger. You know, what does that mean? I don't know quite. But I'd like to see something like COP coming up with a whole thing of the science for solutions, and it's I think that's the way we've got to move it ahead, and be positive rather than being pushed back by it. You know, you guys must find it very difficult to have told everybody all these incredible things, and then, as you correctly said, you know, people are arguing about cutting your scientific budget because, I don't know, it's hard to imagine Switzerland's running out of money or something. You would never expect that to be happening when you're in downtown Geneva with all those fancy cars and buildings and all those shops. But anyhow, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I was fortunate enough to participate in the last IPCC cycle. So I was one of the authors, the many, many authors. And it's an interesting story because we're mandated by governments. So governments are mandating scientists to write reports. And so we write reports, and ever since the first report in the late 80s, it was very clear that, you know, climate change was a threat, that climate change was man-made. And so the science is clear, and it has been clear for very long. So of course, we don't understand all the details. There are many open questions about mechanism, parameters, and so on. And so that's why I think science needs to pursue its activity. But the science is, and yet, we will be mandated to write a 7th report soon. So the new cycle will commence. And I can tell you that the conclusions will already be pretty much the same than the previous ones. So in a way, it's a bit ironic that we're mandated by the national governments. They hear, you know, it's a big event, big communication, and then all the politicians are like, oh, I've read the IPCC report. It's 4,000 pages. Oh, I've read it. But then it's like, okay, well, we push it under the carpet because there are of course there are other issues. It's not the only issue. But so I hear what you say. It's like, okay, science is clear. We try to communicate it as clearly as possible, but then there's no implementation of it.
Yeah, well done. You know, you're battling.
Maybe, if I may, about the science of solutions or I think that's really an important thing that we must address. We should not hide behind the idea that technology alone is going to save us in the short term. And I think this is something we also hear at universities, next to a polytechnic university, we have to keep in mind. We have different timelines at stake. I mean, the ice is melting so fast, there are things we need to bridge quickly, and for that, certain technical solutions might be really important. But we must also look at ourselves and at the way we live, and that I think science, and at the University of Lausanne, there are some very good groups who work on the societal elements of climate change and climate change acceptance, and we also have to look at living differently. Maybe doesn't necessarily mean living in a worse way, and we also have to open our minds a little bit about living differently.
No, I completely agree, and my good friend Bertrand Piccard, he lives somewhere in Lausanne, I think, and he flew around the world, which was rather a brave thing, in a solar-powered aeroplane, and after that he launched his 1,000 Solutions campaign, which I thought was extremely good, and now he's going to try and go around the world in a hydrogen plane. I think it is important that we show solutions, show that all these things are possible, and as you say, and that's very well said, that we don't have to go and live in a cave or sort of wear sackcloth and ashes, but we could live differently. And I think that is something that people don't want to do. So how can we inspire them to possibly think about that? It's difficult. And I don't think, honestly, that a lot of people will change. And that if Mr. and Mrs. Singh in the middle of India decide that, you know, they've wanted a refrigerator for 5 generations, who are we to say don't have a refrigerator to Mr. and Mrs. Singh? And Mr. and Mrs. Patel next door are saying, well, we're going to get a car. Who are us to say no? But I think it's a question of us with technology helping that to happen better. And the biggest battle for our survival on the planet, in my humble opinion, is not really here, and it's not in Europe, and it's not in America. It is in China, India, Indonesia, Korea. It's that area of the world where you've got billions of people, not millions, and that they're moving their economies towards, unfortunately, what we are here. I think that's where I will end up personally, trying, probably fail, but I'll keep trying, and to be in that area of the world. So that's going to be the next mission, I think.
Thank you, Robert. I see the clock, you really have to go. Is there a last question maybe in the public, or? Okay, so we just take the last one here, and then we'll let you go.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one, because with those types of companies, you could just say they're all wrong. And possibly a lot of the things they do are wrong. But I went to Shell and I said, look, I just spent 3 years going around India on a bicycle, which was pretty hard. And I spent most of my time going through rubbish on the streets of major cities. I said, might it not be possible to make some biofuel from that rubbish and garbage that I could use and test in Antarctica? And we did, we made it. And okay, of course, it's not at the Shell petrol station yet. But I don't endorse it, but I like to work with people who can, and I hope will, effect more change. Because everybody in this room is wearing clothing that comes from fossil fuels. I would imagine that these lights here come from some power station that's probably running on electricity and fossil fuels, and unless you walked here, you probably might have used fossil fuels to get here. It's a very difficult thing, and I agree with you, but I'm the sort of person that tries my very best to look at all angles, all possibilities, and to try and get those people to make changes, because we're still using their stuff, and they make obscene profits, which I find very difficult to understand. But rather than not working with them, I try and challenge them to do certain things that may not make a huge difference, but at the same time might. So you're right, it's difficult, it's a fine line, but I try. And your point about storytelling, and maybe we end on this, is that all of us, and you, everybody in this room, if there's one thing that we can practice, and that's telling our story. And trust me, I practice very hard trying to be able to tell the story. And I think in this world full of words and full of a lot of this action on phones, I think having a good story really can make a hell of a difference, I hope. So I thank you all, thank you for that question, but I wish you all the very, very best of luck in your lives, and, you know, keep going. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.